So the firewall is going to act as a security hub, which means that you can control traffic flow to your on-prem network as well as other things in your Azure Virtual Network and things that face the internet like WVD. So when our clients connect to the WVD service, they're out there somewhere in the world, and that could be on your internal network or on the public internet. They're going to communicate with the WVD service. They need to then pass through the firewall in order to be able to get to your internal resources like your domain controllers or your file shares for your FSLogix profiles, and we need to secure that flow from beginning to end. The firewall will also allow us to do some monitoring, tracking, and threat analytics based on how you configure it. Okay, enough theory, let's get to work. First thing we're going to do to kick it off today is look at a resource group that I already have for my network. And we've got several items here. First, we'll go into our virtual network. And notice, first of all, that my DNS servers in this network have been set up to use custom DNS pointing at my private IP for my domain controller. Under the subnet section, I've got a subnet for the Azure Firewall, as well as a subnet for our WVD session hosts. Back in the resource group, let's dive into the network security group. And this currently just has a default configuration, and we need to set this up for Virtual Desktop. Let's go on the left here to our outbound security rules, and then we'll go to add a new rule. Source is going to be our virtual network. The source port range we're going to leave as star. Then our destination is going to be set to use a service tag. And there are a long list of service tags here. Some of them are just related to a service, while others are specific to a service in a region. And we can use this filter box here to find what we're looking for. So I just type in desktop, and then we can select Windows Virtual Desktop, and we want to configure our destination port as 443 using the TCP protocol. For our priorities, I'm going to make this priority 1000 just in case I need to add other rules to be more restrictive later on. And the naming convention I use is if this is allow or deny, then what the service is and what the direction is. So allow WVD outbound. And in my description, I've just put that the intention of this is to be able to get to the WVD URL wildcards. So we'll hit add. All right, and we're going to add two more, and we'll use the same basic pattern, virtual network from any port going to the service tag of Azure Cloud on port 443, TCP allowed with a priority of 1010. The name is allow Azure Cloud outbound, and for this one, I've just put the URL that we're getting all this from as my description because there is a limit of 140 characters, so I can't list every URL specifically. We'll hit add for that. 2 down, 1 to go. And this is going to be slightly different than the other two rules because our destination is going to be an IP address rather than a service tag. And this IP address is the documented public IP of the KMS service for Azure, and it's going to use port 1688. And in my description, I've given it kms.core.windows.net, which is the URL that IP address resolves to. So we'll click add. Now that we've completed the virtual desktop settings in the NSG, I've also added a setting to allow the inbound and outbound traffic to my domain controller subnets and other private domain services. So an NSG is just an access control list. It's not intelligent like a firewall is. So if this is the only thing that you need in your environment in order to secure it, you're good to go. But we're going to kick it up a notch and take a look at the Azure Firewall. And in our firewall, we'll go to our rule set and we'll go to our application rules and we'll click to add a new app rule. And we'll give our rule a name of WVD, set it for a priority of 1000 and allow it. And then in the rule set, we've got a FQDN tag over here on the right for Windows Virtual Desktop that we've selected. Back in the document we were just looking at, there's a few other URLs that we need to have access for. So I'll copy this first one and we'll create a new target FQDN for this. We'll just call it XT-blob or any IP address coming through on the HTTPS protocol to that target URL. And we'll repeat this for the other two. Now you can further restrict this if you have multiple subnets that are using your firewall by declaring exactly what your source IP range is. And I've also added an FQDN tag for Windows Diagnostics and Windows Updates as well. And when you've added everything that you want, then go ahead and click add. Now that that application rule is done, we also need to add a network rule because the application rules only work off of HTTP, HTTPS, and MS SQL. And we need to open that 1688 port for the KMS. So we'll give it the name of Azure KMS, set a priority of 1001, and set the action to be allowed. And the rule itself will be given the name of KMS from our source subnet IP range, going to a specific IP destination using the KMS address and port 1688. We'll hit add on that one. So now that we've got our firewall fully configured, what we want to do is disconnect our NSG and just rely on our firewall. Back in our resource group, we'll open our virtual network, go to subnets, and go to our WVD subnet. Now what we're going to do is disassociate the NSG, and now we want to switch over to using our firewall. So we need to add our route table, and we'll hit save. And while that's saving, I'm going to go to my virtual machine here, and we're going to restart our VM. That way we're sure that we're picking up all of our new IP settings. And just to remind you, the traffic flow from our custom route table says all traffic goes to the firewall. So in order for us to communicate back to our domain controller, our firewall settings need to be correct. And back in our firewall, we'll just go to our rules here and under our network rules. And I've also got a rule here for all traffic flow going into my domain controller subnet. So we pull up our client now and go to log in. And our connectivity still works, pulling up a file explorer, and I can still get out to the share, and we can pull up CM Trace or install any one of these other apps and access our files from DFS, which means our full connectivity to our domain is all working. The modern security perimeter extends beyond your network to include user identities, and so we need to secure them so that when someone tries to log into WVD, they are appropriately challenged to prove they are who they're claiming to be, and they should be granted access. And basically, MFA is that two-factor authentication. It's where we tie our user identity of username and password together with some other kind of authentication. It's just some other way to prove that you are who you say you are when you go to log in. So multi-factor has been around for quite a long time, and today for Azure, the most common ways of doing multi-factor auth is with your smartphone having an authenticator app on it or receiving a text message. And there's a couple different ways that you can implement MFA, and we're going to talk through those today. But where MFA really starts to shine is when we combine it with conditional access. Now, conditional access is where we set rules and policies in our organization that say when you go to log in, do we require you to put in MFA? So if you're signing in from a computer that is in your office, so you may not require MFA or other rules during those conditions. But if you're logging in from somewhere just off the internet, then we need to have some better proof that you are you. So we might challenge you then with MFA. Now, of course, you can go much deeper on each of these topics. We're just going to cover them in relation to Virtual Desktop today, and then we'll go to our users. And at the top here, there's a quick link to go to multi-factor authentication. And enabling multi-factor auth is as simple as checking the box and then clicking enable for any one or multiple of our users. And of course, it's suggested to read the deployment guide before you go ahead and do this. And certainly before you do this for every single user, there are other things to consider first, so we'll come right back to here in a minute. Back in the Azure portal, let's assume for a second, what if you set up MFA and conditional access on all of these users? And now let's ask the question, for argument's sake, what if something went wrong with the MFA service? What if you couldn't multi-factor? That would lock everybody out of using WVD and probably lock everyone out of Azure altogether. That would be an absolutely terrible thing. So to avoid that, it is a good best practice to create a Azure Cloud account that will not have MFA, conditional access, privileged identity management, or any other features enabled. It will be considered a backdoor account. So that way, in case something goes wrong, you have a way to get back into the system and unlock users and keep them going. Now, with setting up something like this, it is also a best practice that no one person have the password. The password should be divided amongst multiple people, so no one person can log in on their own, or it should be stored in a password vault that people have to go through a unlock process to be able to get to those credentials. Kind of like break the glass in case of emergency. So to set up an account like this, we can just go up to the top, click add new user, and this would be a create user operation. And I'll call this user backdoor, fill out the name, first name, and last name. Then I've set a password. For the groups, we do not want any groups selected, but for the roles, we're going to change from being a user to the global administrator role, and we'll hit select for that. And the block sign in here, of course, should be no. And then you can lock it down to the specific country of origin where this account should be used from. So in my case, I'll select United States, and then we go ahead and hit create. And there we can see our new backdoor administrator account. With that out of the way, we can now return to MFA and know that if something goes wrong, we still have a way to get back in and re-enable our users. So I'll select several of our users here and then click enable, and then click enable multi-factor auth. And we see that those users are now enabled. Now, if we use our search filter up here, we change from any to those who are enabled, then there are all of those currently enabled users. But if we switch to enforced, we see that we do not have any yet. Enforced means that we are requiring MFA. Enabled means that you have turned on MFA for these users, but it's not yet configured. And then when I go to sign in to something like the web portal or the WVD client, I give my username as normal, provide my password, and then I click sign in. Now they're presented with this screen that more information is required. So we'll click next. Now each individual user can choose their authentication method. So you can choose here a phone, which will send them a text, or a mobile app, in which case they'll be needing the Microsoft Authenticator. So I'll just choose a phone number in this case and hit next. And then it's going to send a text to my phone number. And I supply the verification code and click verify. And we are done. Additionally, you can set up an application password through this link over here so that for things like signing into Outlook or your other Office products, you don't have to provide this challenge authentication because the app itself is responsive to that challenge. In this case, I'll just click done and we are signed into the app because our MFA challenge was accepted. And since I've now enabled MFA, when I open my client application and I go to log in, I'm now asked to represent my credentials. And there's my MFA challenge. You put in your code and hit verify, and the rest of our sign-in process completes as normal. So now let's kick things up a notch and add some conditional access. Now, as we talked about in the beginning, conditional access is one of those advanced features in Azure AD, so we need a license for this. So we see licenses over here on the left. And the first thing we have is getting started with license management. So I'll go over here on the right to get a free trial. And we have two different services to pick from. The premium P2 licenses will give us every feature possible. And then the enterprise mobility section above that will be P2, but also give you some Office 365 functionality. So I'll open up the free trial here for the EMS licenses because why not, and click activate. Now that that's enabled, we can go to license features and see everything that we have now enabled, along with a learn more link in the center for each one of those features so that you can always figure out what these features do. And over on the left, we'll go to all products, and there you can see is our EMS license for 250 users. So we'll check the box here to go to assign it, and we'll click the users link here. So we'll add several of our users and hit select, and then we have to pick their assignment option. And at this point, there's no reason why we shouldn't select everything, and we'll hit OK for that. And then when we go to assign, you might have a problem. So in this case, my licenses are not assigned, and the reason why is it says that we cannot assign licenses without usage locations specified. So if you haven't had to set some of the information around your users, if they were just synced over from your Active Directory, and you had never set up these fields, then your users are also going to have this problem. So inside the user Hulk, if we scroll down, we see our usage location is blank. So we'll hit edit up here at the top, select our usage location, and this is going to become important for conditional access in particular, and we'll hit save. Now that we've done that, over here on the left under licenses, we can do an assignment now for our E5, selecting all of our services and hitting save. And now that license has been assigned successfully. Now, obviously, we don't want to have to do this for every single user by hand. What if you have hundreds or thousands of them? So we can make this easier with PowerShell. And there's two basic ways that we could script this out. This way is going to be using a sync rule through Azure AD Connect, and you can certainly do this if you like. But if that looks too complicated, don't worry, there's an easier way to do it. First thing we have to do is connect to Azure AD, so I'll run that and we'll log in. And with that out of the way, the command is very simple. It's set-Azure AD user, passing the object ID of our UPN, in this case Thor, and then setting the usage location as US, and we run that. And then we can run the get-Azure AD user and then select all the properties. And at the bottom here, you can see our usage location is now US. we're going to run this through a for each loop. So I'll run this next command, which is going to give me every user in my environment that does not have Microsoft in the name. And that's because there are some accounts that are on Microsoft.com accounts and we don't want those. So here are all of the UPNs and they look good to me. So now we'll run the next part, which is the for each loop, and that is done. And of course we can verify that back in the Azure portal and open up Gamora and scroll down just a little bit. And there's our usage location as United States. So now we can successfully add an assignment for the E5 license to Gamora and hit save, and that's done. So back in the overview, we'll now scroll down in the blade to security, and then first we'll go to named locations. So if I go into Azure here, you'll notice that these are the IP address ranges for my Azure private virtual networks, and they're also marked as a trusted location. And we can do that by IPs, or we could do it by countries, but it will allow us to add certain other global rules. So I've selected the 5 countries for our global offices, and we'll hit create. But notice that this is not trusted because we cannot possibly trust every IP address in a single country. And I've also added untrusted locations as well. And at the top here, we can start by creating a new policy. So we'll call this policy WVD and then select our users. And I'll choose to select users and groups. So in this case, I'll just select these 4 users and hit select. Then we can also add excludes here, and I'll choose the same users and groups. And I'll select my admin here. We'll hit done for that. And then we have to select our cloud app. So I'll choose select apps, and I'll just type in Windows Virtual Desktop, and you can see we've got a few options, and here is why. Because we have the non-ARM and the ARM versions available now, we have these multiple choices. So the one that's related to the new ARM portal or the spring update would be this second one. It's the one that starts with 9CD and ends in D07, and that's covered in our documentation. We'll come back and do the other one in just a moment. We can keep these rules separate. So we'll hit select for that, then hit done. Now you can select some conditions if you want to, and the conditions can be tied to many different factors. One would be a sign-in risk. How risky does this sign-in attempt appear? What is the specific type of device a user is coming from? What are the locations that they're coming from? Then we have 2 new features here around client apps and device states. So under locations, I'll choose yes for this, and I'll select my locations, and we can see the ones from our named locations. And for this rule, I'll just select Azure as well as my on-prem, and we'll hit select for that and hit done there. And that's all I'm going to configure here. And under access controls, we'll click on that. And here we want to grant access and require multi-factor authentication, and we'll hit select for that. And under session, we'll select sign-in frequency, and then we have to select the units here, and that is hours or days. The shortest time span that we can set this policy for is 1 hour. So you will get prompted right now through conditional access to submit your MFA token. Then if you sign out 20 minutes later and you go to sign back in, you would not be re-challenged for MFA. Now, of course, you can then expand this out to days as well. And so depending on your location policy, where these users are coming from, you may want this to be extremely restrictive or not have them prompt for MFA at all, which is another rule set that we can get into in a minute. So I'll have this go for 1 hour, and I'll hit select for that. And then we have the policy enable feature, and this is where we can choose to have this just be a learning tool at the moment, just have it report only, or we can enable this policy which will enforce these settings, or we could just turn this policy off if something is not working correctly, or we want to retire the policy. So I'll set the policy to on, and we'll hit create, and we can do this from a different place as well. So back in the overview, if we go to our enterprise applications, and we scroll down, we've got Windows Virtual Desktop here. This is the non-ARM registration that we had done. We can click on our client, and then over here on the left, go to conditional access, and we're basically in the same place. Set our policy, go to select our specific users or groups. In this case, I'll choose an Azure AD group. We've already got our applications selected, and then you can set your conditions. And for locations, I'll just choose all trusted locations this time. Under grant, we'll set it for multi-factor authentication. And for our session frequency, this time I'll make this for 1 day. And this policy I'm going to set just as report only. So now back to the main page of Azure AD, we'll go back to security, back to conditional access, and we can see both policies are here and what their current status is. Now that we've configured the policy, I'm going to go to my app here and I'm going to unsubscribe myself. That way I should be asked to log in again. We'll go to subscribe and it wants to know our user identity. So I'll put in my credentials and hit next and provide my password. And we'll hit sign in and we're prompted for our MFA. And we'll click verify and we are signed in. So now right away, I'm going to unsubscribe again and then go right back in. And it resubscribed me without having to provide my MFA credentials at all because I have already signed in and I've got 1 hour before that expires. And I'll open the web browser version, and without having to provide my challenge to MFA at all, I am instantly able to sign in. However, if I go to an in-private browser and I do the same thing, now I have to provide my credentials. And now I'm being challenged again for MFA because even though I've provided those credentials within the last hour, this is a different device essentially because it is a private browser and so it is not yet trusted. So I can go ahead and verify and now I'm in. Let's go back to our conditional access policy now. So let's go and create a new policy. And for this one, we'll click to enable the new preview experience. We'll give it the name of untrusted location for WVD, and we'll set our users to be all users. We will add one exclusion for our WVD admin just in case. For our client app, we'll do the same select we did before. And in this case, we'll just select all of the virtual desktop apps and hit select. And the conditions, we'll choose a selected location of untrusted locations and hit select for that. And under the grant rules, we're going to block access. We don't need to select a sign-in frequency since we're blocking things here. And we'll choose to enable this policy and hit create. So now any user coming from an untrusted location will now be blocked. And for my IP location details, I'm appearing as though I'm in Singapore, which is not one of my trusted locations. And we'll go to sign in again, provide our password. And we do not get the MFA challenge, but we do get a message saying that we can't sign in because we don't meet the criteria necessary to be able to do that. And there is a more details link. And we can see at the bottom here our troubleshooting details. In case you reach this message in error, you can give that to your IT folks who should be able to help sort that out. Back in the Azure portal, we can also scroll down here to the monitoring section. And if you haven't done this already for your Azure AD, you definitely should. Go to your diagnostic settings and make sure that you're sending your Azure AD logs to Log Analytics or somewhere else so that you can track and monitor what's going on. And when you do, you can go into sign in. We can see all of the different logins that have happened, what their status was, success or failure, what their locations were, and you can click on any of the users if you want to grab more details. We can see from the location, that same public IP address, and under the conditional access rules, we have the report only rule for the non-ARM WVD, as well as the conditional access rules for WVD and untrusted locations. And these are just showing you all the rules applied to this user as a whole. To see the particular details around this login, you go to authentication details. We can see access has been blocked due to conditional access policies. So we're going to be diving into three major areas today, and that is Azure Security, then WVD Security, and finally operating system level security. And there are quite a lot of things to talk about. Over in the Azure portal, taking a look at all the things that we could do at the Azure layer for security. This is going to be that cloud-based layer where we can use things like Azure Policies, the Security Center, and Azure Advisor, and then combine that with some of the other Azure services. So starting off with the Azure Security Center, and we have covered Security Center previously in the Azure Academy, so I'll link that up here on the top right. You can go check that out. Security Center spans multiple different layers of Azure, and that breaks down into three general pillars: policy and compliance, resource security hygiene, and then at the bottom here, threat protection. Now, we could spend the rest of the day going through Security Center line by line in each one of these recommendations, but I'll leave you with some homework. Go explore your own Security Center and go improve your security scores. Moving on, because we have a lot more to cover, we'll go to All Services and open the Azure Advisor. Now, Azure Advisor works on the same basic principles as the Security Center, but it covers more than just security. There are 5 major areas in the Advisor, and these are best recommendations from Microsoft for your environments. So So again, something for you to dig into further and take a look at, which brings us to the Azure Monitor. Now, Azure Monitor works across many different areas as well, and you can monitor everything in Azure from your network to your activity logs, performance metrics, health of the Azure service in general, and all the way down to your virtual machines and each of the aspects of their virtual machines. And of course, one of the big tie-ins to the Azure Monitor would be Log Analytics. This is where we take all of that data from across all of Azure, including WVD, and we can store it in one place so we can run processing queries and analytics here to determine what exactly is going on. And let's go quickly up to the search bar and we'll type in Sentinel and open up the Azure Sentinel. Now, this is an add-on for Log Analytics that is specifically security focused, and it's going to take all of the things that are going on that Log Analytics is aware of and instantly be able to tell you from a security posture how the environment is doing. And we have covered Sentinel as well in the past, so if you're unfamiliar with the basics, you can go check that out. So if we go down to hunting here, we can run all of the hunting queries that are baked into the system, and there are 82 queries in total. But that's not the end of the story, because there are also workbooks. And the workbooks help you to take that data and then visualize it. So I could go to the Azure activity logs over here, scroll down just a little bit and view the template. Then you can see my resource groups at the top here and all the activities that were generated by them, as well as activities over time in the graph, which users actually performed those activities. You see a lot of WVD admin stuff was being done, and it also presents a scatter chart of how all of those events took place. We can look at another workbook for Azure AD sign-ins, and lots of detail around sign-ins here. We can see sign-ins by location, and if we scroll down a little bit, we can see sign-ins based on conditional access policies and whether they succeeded or failed, and then troubleshooting sign-in issues, what the particular error codes are that sign-ins receive, whether or not they passed, MFA challenges, and all of that stuff. And we'll get into some of this a little deeper in our monitoring video, but I'll just leave you with that as a teaser, and then of course you can get into building some great dashboards based on all of that information. Going to our virtual machines, open up one of our VMs, and then we'll go to disks. And you can see at the top here is an encryption button. This is going to be able to turn on Azure Disk Encryption, which is going to protect the operating system disk from someone being able to download and walk away with it. So if we click encryption here at the top, we can choose to encrypt the OS or the OS and data disk. And once you've made that selection, then you can click here to select your key vault that you want to use. And if you don't have one, you can create one along with a key and version. And I'll just stop right here on encryption because there are some great new features around disk encryption, so we're working on a video for that now, so subscribe so you don't miss that one. And I know we're going quickly because there's a lot more to get through. So drilling in just a little bit more, we've got our FSLogix profiles, and those profiles live in some kind of storage somewhere. In this case, I've got it sitting in Azure Files. So there's all my current profiles at this point, but regardless of how you have FSLogix set up, we do need to protect those profiles in some way for disaster recovery, for backup, etc. Now, an Azure Files storage account or NetApp will allow you to take snapshots directly in storage. However, Azure Files can also be integrated with Azure Backup. So I've got a recovery services vault here, and under backups, you can see I've got one item protected, and this is my Azure Files storage account. And from here, I can force backups right now, or I can do a restore of an entire share or a single file out of that backup. And you could do that just by selecting any recovery point from any date and time, choosing whether or not to recover to the original or an alternate location. And then you can dig in and grab the particular files that you need, perhaps just the user profile. Hit select, and then you can go to do the restore. Now, speaking of FSLogix security, let me take you out to the FSLogix docs. And the quick link to get here is aka.ms/FSLogix. And once you get here, over on the left, we'll type storage into the filter, and we'll click on this link to configure our storage. When you set up FSLogix, you will have a file share, and that file share should be configured in this way to have least privilege for the users. And the way this would look inside Windows, we right-click on our share and go to Properties, then go to the Security tab and go to Advanced. And here we have my administrators group with full control over this folder, subfolder, and files. Here is the creator owner with modify over subfolders and files, and the users themselves have modify over this folder only. This is not the way that permissions will be added automatically when you bring in a user or group. You'll have to click edit and then change which folder this applies to depending on the user role and whether or not they have modify or full control. So that should take you a quick second. And once that's done, the individual users will be able to create their own folders on the shares as well as their own profiles, but they would not be able to go in and delete somebody else's stuff. Back in the WVD admin portal, let's get into some WVD specific security. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at our application groups. We have 4 application groups and 1 desktop group for each host pool. So from a security standpoint, it would put you in a better position to give your users remote apps instead of full desktops. Now, of course, this is going to depend on your particular workload and the applications, user expectations, etc. But the more remote apps you can present them with, not only will that be better for security, it will also be generally better for performance because it costs more resources of the system to present a full desktop than just an application. So along with this idea, how do we manage our app groups? So if I go to my first app group here to present Edge, and we go to the applications, we can see one application is part of this group, and we go under assignments, and I've got one Active Directory group that's presented here for membership. So any user who I want to have use Edge, I would add them to this group. Now I do of course have the option for adding individual users, but that makes management more difficult. Take this other group, for example, for Paint. When I go to the applications, we can see multiple applications are presented here. Rather than managing it just through Active Directory group membership, like I've done things for forever, I've got that group present, but now I also have all these individual users. Okay, so it's not easy to tell from one place who all has access. I have to look now in Active Directory and also check the app group. So from a security management perspective, it's much easier to manage this through a single group membership. Now, with that said, there is a place to have multiple applications presented through one app group for sure. But when you do this, it's going to be because that app group is related to a specific type of user or a role. And these are all the apps that they need to do their job. And that's perfectly fine. It's just a question of management and how you want to work, govern the environment. With that said, let's also take a look at our host pools. And inside this host pool, we'll go to Properties. And on the Properties screen, we have down here at the bottom, there is a flag that we can set here for having a validation environment. Back in the Azure Docs, if we scroll down to the Windows Virtual Desktop section, and right here in the center, we can click on Create a Host Pool to validate service updates. Now, the validation flag will help you to see all of the latest updates that are coming through the host pool and the WVD service before they hit your production environment. So a validation pool should be set up that mirrors as much as possible your prod host pools, so you can see all the latest stuff that Microsoft puts out and how that will affect your environment. And over here on the right, you can see the update schedule, that this basically happens on a monthly basis, but there will be some more critical updates that need to get pushed out more frequently. And by setting the validation flag for your environment, that means that this pool can be used for testing. You can just select yes for that and hit save. Then if we scroll up to the top, we have our RDP settings. And the RDP settings is where we control the look and feel of the environment on a technical level. So for example, when people log on to a full desktop, what is their display resolution going to be? Do you want a fixed resolution size, a custom size, or let the computer on the other end figure it out? Do you want this displayed in full screen mode or windowed mode? And then we come down to some of the services, and there's more options that we'll have in PowerShell, which we'll dig into in another video. So subscribe so you don't miss our PowerShell management video. But for best security, we do not want to have local hard drives projected into the environment. If we did, then people could remove data out of our WVD environment, so we'll want to turn this to off. And that goes also for the clipboard and the printers, so that again, people cannot remove things easily from the environment. Depending on your configuration in your environment, you may want to enable smart cards for better authentication. And then we have the features for audio input output. And once you've set those the way that you like, go ahead and hit save. And again, there's more options in PowerShell, which we'll dig into later. Now here's the WVD Windows client. This is the next part of security. So I'll sign into one of my desktops using that latest client. And here we are logged in as the Hulk. Now, one of the cool things that's in the latest client is up here at the very top. See the RDP bar that we have up here? If we click on the connection information, we've got a message that says your connection network round trip time is good. But now there's a see details. And when you do, it'll give you all the details about your connection, what client you have, what your timestamp is, the activity ID, which we'll get into more in monitoring, as well as the network details. I've got a 22 millisecond round trip, just over 13 megabits per second bandwidth, not using any frames at this point. And I've also got the details of which gateway I'm connected to and my host. And you can then Control C to copy this information to share it with your IT folks in case you are having an issue. And with that, that leads us into operating system level security as our last major part of this video. And of course, there are about 10,000 ways that you can secure your operating system, so we'll be covering some of the highlights. Now, the first thing that I want you to notice is that my screen here is going to go black in a second or two. I've got some group policies in place, and those policies dictate how my environment functions. And I've got a particular one about idle time. That says if the screen is left idle, and this works for apps as well as desktops, basically turn on the screensaver and lock the system. Okay, this is the easiest way to make sure that your screens aren't being left idle. People could just log in, don't ever walk away from your system without locking it. And you can enforce this like I have through a group policy. And you probably don't want to have it set for 30 seconds in your environment like I do. That would drive your users insane, but figure out what's reasonable in your environment. And I just need to put in my password to log back in, and I'm right back to where I was. Back in the group policy management console, I've got a few different policies set up for how my environment functions. We'll start off with this WVD policy. Under the user configuration policy admin templates, this is where I've got for forcing the screensaver like I just showed you. A few other policies to support that, to password protect the screensaver, prevent users from being able to change it, and also setting my 30-second timeout, which again, you should set appropriately for your environment. Under the computer configuration section, we've got a few other policies, and these are to help users to be able to drain out of the environment. So if they're idle for a short period of time, we've got our screensaver to kick in and protect us. But then after that, there's going to be some amount of time where we eventually want the user to be disconnected from their session, and then a further amount of time where we want to force them to log off because obviously they're not using the system. So take a look at those settings and then do what's right in your environment. So if you are going to be allowing your users to access the full desktop, you may want to consider AppLocker. So AppLocker will actually restrict or enable certain applications from being run in your system based on user groups and other default rule sets. This is very helpful if you're just using Windows Virtual Desktop as a jump server environment to get into your regular corporate environment. The only thing people should be using in those situations would be the RDS tool itself. So you'd want to use AppLocker to enable that but block everything else. And inside your group policy editor, you can drill down into the application control policies, and that's where you'll find AppLocker. And there's 4 different sets of rules here. I'll start with Windows installers. Basically, I just have a deny all rule that blocks my WVD users from being able to install anything. And then I've got another executable rule here that's going to allow the RDP client to function, but deny everything else. And on the subject of being able to join things, I've got a special user here that's used for joining VMs to my environment. So this is my AD join user, and I've delegated this permission. So in Virtual Desktop, I can only join users to the appropriate OU where all these policies take place and everything else with this special AD join account. And you do that through delegating control, selecting your particular user, and then we would create a custom delegation task. And this would only be related to computer objects. And then we check these other items as well. And under the next section here, and if we scroll down a little bit, we need to reset passwords, read and write account restrictions, and then also validate, write DNS host names and service principal names. Then you can go and complete the wizard, and then you can look at the advanced properties for the security rights and see all of those particular functions. Another way to keep your session hosts secure is to make sure that they're using the latest version of the operating system, patches, as well as your applications are kept up to date. And this integrates very well with the shared image gallery, and that's in a recent video that we did on the Azure Academy, so go check that out if you missed that. This will allow you to make multiple versions of your image and then use that latest version of the image inside the WVD admin portal so that you can build new session hosts from that latest image. Inside the host pool, you go to session hosts and then click add. Hit next for the virtual machines, and that will reference your latest image from the shared image gallery. And that will enable you to turn over the VMs in the host pool rather quickly with a minimal amount of effort. And the final area that I want to just briefly touch on is that of antivirus and anti-malware support. Of course, every Windows machine has Windows Defender installed by default, but there is another optional security step that you can take. That's using Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection, or ATP. And I want to give a quick shout out to Wes Thomas, who's an M365 subject matter expert who helped me on this section with ATP, because it's definitely not my area of expertise. So follow him on LinkedIn and thank him for his contributions. You can go through this sign-up process and accept the license conditions after you've read them thoroughly, of course, and hit next, and then provide all your details, and you'll be met with this setup screen. And this will just walk you through quickly setting up Defender ATP. And we'll click next on this first screen. And then you need to choose where your data will be stored. Now, if you choose a location now and then want to change it later, you will have to open a support ticket for that. But we'll select US for the moment, and then we'll scroll down a little. And 180 days of retention is just fine by me. And then it asks for your organizational size. And then at the very bottom, if we scroll down a little bit more, there is a feature flag here to enable preview features, which you can leave on or off. That's up to you. And then click next. And you want to confirm these settings because, again, it will take a support ticket to be able to make changes. And then the setup will go ahead and create your Defender instance, and that'll just take a moment. And once that's done, you'll be brought to this screen where you can onboard your first system. And then from here, you can select in the dropdown which kind of operating system you want to protect. In this case, we're doing Windows 10. And then for the script here, you want to choose the VDI onboarding scripts for non-persistent devices. Then you go ahead and download that package. Then we'll scroll down a little bit here and we'll copy this PowerShell script because we're going to need that for the next step. And inside our VM, we'll extract that package. And then we're just going to run the command file as an admin, which will just take a moment. And once that's done, in a admin command prompt, we'll run that PowerShell that we got out of the ATP portal, and that'll just take a second. And back in the Defender Security Center, we can see our VM was onboarded successfully, and you can click on the VM to see any of the details, as well as a timeline of anything that happened with this device, different security recommendations, as well as a full software inventory, a list of discovered vulnerabilities, and any KBs that are outstanding on the system. And then at the very top here, we've got a few controls. Run an antivirus scan right now, as well as restrict any apps from being executed on the machine in case there's a problem. And if things are really bad, we can fully isolate the device. And finally, back in our VM, when you're ready to onboard your entire estate into ATP, you can do that by opening the File Explorer and navigating to the C Windows System 32 Group Policy machine folder, and in there you'll want to create a new folder, and we'll call that scripts. And then inside scripts, we want to create a folder called startup. And then we can take the very same command file that we were working with earlier and copy that into that directory. And then we can capture and make a new image version out of that, which will then add ATP to all new machines going forward.
Now, there have been a ton of videos burning through the interwebs on Windows 11 and hardware requirements. And we're going to need to use those in Azure as well, and that means we need Gen 2 VMs along with a TPM chip running Secure Boot. And this was all covered in a new preview feature called Trusted Launch, and we went over the basics of that in my last video, which you should watch before you continue. Go ahead, I'll wait. All caught up? Cool. Now, if this is your second or third time that you're here and you haven't subscribed yet, that's the universe telling you you need to click the subscribe button. Let's get into this. We're going to build a Windows 11 virtual machine in Azure Virtual Desktop, and I already have a host pool set aside for Windows VM session hosts. So click up top and generate yourself a new registration key and save that over to your notepad because we'll need it in a minute. Then go to your session host on the left and click the Add button at the top. Click Next on the first screen, and let's go right over there and select See All Images, and then search for Windows 11. Scroll down just a little bit, and there they all are. Notice that they're all marked with Preview, because Windows 11 is not officially released yet, but we're gonna go all the way today and select Windows 11 Multi-Session plus Microsoft 365 apps, which will give us all of those Office and Teams with AV redirection baked right in. We've got a problem. Now, this is not really a problem with the location, but rather you can't build Windows 11 through the AVD portal yet. Now, we've got a few methods we can do to get this working today. First thing we could do is just deploy a normal Windows 11 VM. Now, to do that with Trusted Launch, like we covered in my previous video, you're gonna need this special link to get to a preview version of the Azure portal. Now, there are certain images that are allowed for Trusted Launch, and technically Windows 11 is not on the list. And that's not really a big shock because it's not officially released yet. But if you go through this process, it'll work, trust me. So go ahead and select your Windows 11 image. I'll just pick Windows 11 Enterprise for this. When you get over to the advanced screen, scroll down to the bottom, make sure that you have a Gen 2 VM selected, and then go ahead and check the box for Trusted Launch, and then check the following boxes for Secure Boot and VTPM. Complete the rest of your build as normal, and then inside the OS, once it boots up, download the agents, install them with your registry token that we generated earlier, and you are good to go. Just repeat that for all of your session hosts, which does sound like a lot of work, so we can automate this a little more if we just add a custom script extension. So let's walk through the build again. This time we'll select Windows 11 Multi-Session. And then on the advanced screen at the bottom, be sure that you check Gen 2 and Secure Boot, VTPM, and all that stuff. And then scroll back up to the top of the advanced screen, and you want to select to add an extension. Scroll down and find the custom script extension, then hit the add at the bottom. Now the link for the PowerShell script we're going to give it is in the video description below that takes you out to my GitHub, and you can follow the directions right here with me. Go ahead and hit the Browse button and then select whichever storage account you want to use. Inside there, if you don't have a container already, you'll need to create one, but I've got one already called Extensions, but you can call it anything you like. Inside there, click the Upload button, and then over here, you want to click the blue folder, and that'll give you this file dialog. Just paste in the link to the PowerShell script that's in the video description, and then click the Upload button. And there you go, the script is loaded right over there. Go ahead and select it and then hit the button at the bottom. And now we need to give it the arguments. These are those input parameters. And in this case, there are two of them. The first one is -profile path, and then that'll be your SMB share where FSLogix goes. And then after that, you put a space, -registration token, and then you paste the registration token that you saved to your notepad earlier. Let the rest of the build continue as normal, and then your VM will be built and automatically joined to your host pool. Let's take this to the next level. And I've already done all of the work for you and made everything super easy. So I've got a link in the video description that'll take you here to my GitHub page, and I've got an easy button there for you. Go ahead and click that, and you'll be deploying Windows 11 for Virtual Desktop. And this template will allow you to build up to 100 Windows 11 session hosts at the same time. Just fill it out, and at the bottom here, make sure you put in your file share where FSLogix profiles will be stored, and then paste in your registration key that you saved earlier to your notepad. Then go ahead and hit build. And in just a few minutes, that'll be done, and you can pull up your virtual desktop client, sign right in, and there you go, Windows 11 session host deployed for Azure Virtual Desktop so that you can start testing with nothing else required right now. Now, if you have any suggestions on how we can improve this template or ideas for new video topics, please comment down below and share those with me. And if you want to see more on Windows 11 in Azure, please help this video get to 5,000 views by sharing it with your friends and colleagues on social media, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Happy learning.